Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. As an adherent of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, I'm very interested in values and the type of things that motivate us. I'm interested in, should we be motivated by love or motivated by fear? Should we pursue those things that we like, or should we be trying to avoid those things that we don't like? So when I came across an article recently in Psychology Today magazine about the difference between passion-based motivation and anger-based motivation, I knew I had to have the author on. His name is Ray W. Christner. He is a psychologist. He is also a licensed, or rather, a nationally certified school psychologist, and he's also a board certified behavioral and cognitive psychologist. Dr. Christner, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. Please call me Ray.
All right.
Like being informal. So,
Ray it is.
all right.
Maybe you should get yourself a nice tag like Dr. Ray. It'd be like Dr. Phil. You could
Yeah,
replace
right.
him.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll take the Dr. Phil success, but whatever works.
All right. So, as I mentioned, your article is about passion based motivation and
Yeah.
anger based motivation. Am I right that this has a lot to do with our choice of values or the type of things that we value and how we value them?
Yeah, I think that definitely is kind of at the root of this, right? I mean, I think kind of our values, do kind of set things in play. I think this article, though, for me came out of I think an idea of a shift. So I kind of mentioned, I think in the first part of the article, yeah, I was just kind of reflecting on people. Like, what are we seeing? What we see media wise, social media, even just my friends that I care about and like being with, and seeing this kind of shift from this idea of working towards something and more being passionate about being against something. And that really is just, I think, a mindset shift for people who I think their underlying values might be different, but they get caught up in all what we see again on TV or social media. And it changes, I think, the way they react.
So, what is the difference between passion based motivation and anger based motivation?
Yeah, I think in a simple kind of format for me is that both of them kind of work similar from a neurobiology standpoint. Gives us the same kind of reaction in our brain, but the different is the idea of working against someone. This idea of I want to stop this, or I'm angry with this person and I don't want them to succeed, versus the idea of wanting to move forward towards something, build something, create something. This idea of, gosh, I want this to happen and I'm going to take these steps. I was having a conversation this morning with someone over something really simple, football. We think, okay, how's football play into the idea of motivation? And the conversation started with someone who said, can't wait for the Super Bowl. I'm going to cheer so hard so the Kansas City Chiefs don't win. Like they're already in this mindset of, I'm not going to have fun at the game. I'm not going to just embrace a team, even if it's not my team. Like my Steelers let me down, so I didn't have my team in there either. But it's not that we're focusing on, hey, we want to be passionate and root for someone. It was much more going into this with a passion, with a motivation of, I want to see the other person lose. Now, so for me, I kind of go, wow, does that set us up? So listen, the Kansas City Chiefs are a good team. There's a chance they're going to do well. So when they do well, does that create more despair for us? We're not enjoying the game. We're not doing all of these things. So that motivation under it is something even that simple. I mean, this is something as simple as a football game, but it does change our mindset, I think, going in. Why are we doing it? So for me, I'm going to the Super Bowl because I want to be with my friends. I want to enjoy the game. I want to, do all of these other things that I'm motivated for a different reason. So at the end, no matter who wins or loses, my reaction is not going to be all that different. My purpose, my motivation for being there is going to be achieved no matter the outcome. So that's kind of how I look at these two things. It's are we working towards something or are we working against something?
It's interesting because I'm a Los Angeles Lakers basketball fan.
Yeah,
And as such, I was a Kobe Bryant fan. So
sure.
when LeBron James came along, I always rooted against him. And so I rooted against him ever making the finals. And once he made the finals, every year I would root against him winning. So I wasn't actually rooting for anybody. I was just
Yeah,
rooting against. And you're right, it is a different mindset. I wasn't watching the game to enjoy it. I
right.
was watching to root against somebody else. And it seems like there's just something amiss there, that when we're motivated that way, we're not going to achieve the things that we want. So I guess my question is, like, what is the first of all, I want to know is, why are so many of us motivated in this way, or motivated by anger against whatever, against immigrants, against whomever? Why
Right.
does that come so naturally to so many of us?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, it we are naturally wired that it is easier to focus on negative than the positive. I oftentimes when I work with patients, I say, it's kind of interesting. Our sensation of taste, we taste sweet at 1 to 200 units. That's how we taste it. We taste bitter at 1 to 2 million units. It's that
Oh
much more
wow.
intense, right? So, and that's for a protection, right? I mean, so listen, I don't discount anger is a good thing. It protects us. It does some good things. We need all kinds of emotions, but I think we're wired that way to some extent. So, with part of it, it's just a little bit of who we are kind of naturally. I think then other things kind of also contribute to that. So, just I think social and cultural reinforcement. There is this idea that when we see somebody, that's anger, we see it as being powerful. We jump on these messages because they do create this energy. Yeah, I probably will mention social media a bunch of times. I think it's a great way to look at it. How many times do positive messages get completely overwhelmed by all the negative messages on social media? We tend to follow it. There's this kind of emotional contagion that happens. I think also, I think just naturally, sometimes people feel powerless, right? I mean, I think we get to a place where maybe things aren't going well. Maybe we are angry, which is a good emotion. But when someone then puts something else on it, that they kind of give us a point of view, it may increase our sense of power. And so it's, even though it's probably a short-lived kind of motivation, it still for some people feels good. We've all been there. We've all gotten angry or upset to a point where it makes us maybe react in a way that we get a reaction, whether that's, maybe somebody at a store did something and we raise our voice, and then customer service says, oh no, we're going to help you out now. We get reinforced, for that. So I mean, I think those things are all kind of part of it. In my reflection of writing this article, the other piece is, I think we're all just stressed, and I think we're all kind of burnt out. And so we're more vulnerable, I think, right now to this idea that, that when we hear these kind of emboldened, kind of aggressive motivations or anger motivations, I think it's easier for us to jump on them, just because we think it's going to take quick action for us.
I think there's a big hint in something you said when you mentioned the taste, the
Yeah.
difference between the bitterness and the sweetness. And what that tells me is that being motivated by passion rather than anger is something that's going to take work,
Oh,
right? It's
yeah.
something that
Right.
we have to actually work toward doing. And you mentioned the word vulnerable. And in your article, you said that being motivated by passion requires vulnerability. Why is
Yeah.
that? What do you, first of all, what do you mean? And why is that so?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we are sharing our passions with people, there is a vulnerability. We're letting people know what we want, and we also, in reality, might not be successful at it. I mean, we could be passionate about something and it not go as planned. And I think that we do have a vulnerability in how people perceive us. This idea that we might be criticized. Maybe someone's not going to like the passion that I have, and so maybe they make a comment, and then all of a sudden in my head that creates some self-doubt. I think that when we're passionate, there is the reality that there are going to be people that are going to maybe not react the same way. There are things I'm passionate about that my friends are not. But I'm okay when they tell me that they're not. It doesn't affect me as much. But I think that's hard for some people. I think being in a position where you're putting yourself out there is tough. And I think that for a lot of reasons that's the case. But I think, yeah, we have to be vulnerable to be passionate, because we're sharing our interests. We're sharing something about us with people. I think anger is very different. I mean, I think anger, well, I'm sure there's a little vulnerability with anger, don't get me wrong. Most people, they're so kind of passionate in that anger itself. They don't think about it. They're just reacting. It's much more impulsive. So I think the other piece, maybe to add to that, so I think anger is an impulsive piece. I think the vulnerability also comes with the fact that being passionate is strategic. And so our strategy can get criticized.
See, when I think about this issue, it comes down to the type of life that I want to live, right? Do
Sure.
I want to spend my life mad and pissed off at people and, motherfucking everybody that comes
Yeah.
by?
Right.
Or do I want to spend my life enjoying the richnesses that is existence? You know what I mean? That all the wonderful
Right.
grandeur that life can have, all the happiness I can achieve. It just seems, it doesn't just seem it. I mean, it's obvious that that is the better way to go. I'm guessing that, evolutionarily, 20,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago, it was probably in our interest to be angry and be on the defensive. But
Right.
that's not the world that we're currently living in. And so I guess what I'm saying is just that it's a shame that so
Yeah.
many of us, and I include myself, that allow it to get into this, just being angry all the time when there's so much to be passionate about. Now,
Yeah.
is there like physiological harms that come from the anger based motivation if one is constantly in that state?
Sure. Yeah. So yes, I mean, I think 2 points. One, kind of piggybacking on what you said first. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that it's like there's so much good that we could kind of focus on. And I think that the anger part in the short term can create our passion. Like, I'm sure, I mean, Michael, you and probably your listeners, we've all had something that pissed us off, that motivated us to start something else. I mean, I think all really good movements start with getting pissed off about something, right? Like, it starts with like, wow, this is an injustice, or I'm upset about this. What I'm saying is we have to change from the anger to the strategy, to the passion. It's okay that the anger gets us there. It's okay, that's good, but it's not sustainable. And then to the idea is there harm? Yeah. So I mean, anger is, again, it's a good emotion, but it's not meant to be sustained for a long period of time. It increases our stress hormones. It increases our cortisol levels, our adrenaline levels. And physiology, not to get into all the research that's out there, is we know that when we live in that stress reaction, it takes a toll on our body. Even things like chronic pain can come from it. Our blood pressure can go up. It affects our immune system. I mean, there's a lot of kind of physiological pieces. So we don't want to sustain in that. We don't want to sustain in that high level. So when we look at it from a neurology standpoint, I mentioned it's kind of passion and anger is similar. They both increase our dopamine levels because there's a reward to it, so it kind of feels good. But it's what happens after that reward is, does it set our pleasure systems of our brain off, which increases things like oxytocin, which is good for us. That's what passion will do for us. Builds relationships, it builds social interactions, it builds those kind of things. Or is it increasing that cortisol and that adrenaline, which is going to have some negative impacts long term.
Also, I have a history of a very bad anger problem, especially when I was
Yeah,
much younger. And I realize when I'm angry, I tend to make mistakes. So
sure.
it seems like if I'm driven by anger toward a goal, that the very thing that's driving me is likely to trip me up
Yeah.
because I'm just not thinking clearly. Now, you mentioned the physiology. I'm just curious about what is the physiology that causes that, that when we're angry, we can't think clearly.
Yeah, so we go into our kind of fight or flight system of our brain. So while we have this nice big cortex that has all those great wrinkles in it, when we're angry, we're not using that. We're using much more of our primitive aspect of our brain, what's referred to as our limbic system. And it's to be protective. When our minds, through evolution, we were trying to run from bears eating us. So we didn't want to think about that. We wanted to impulsively react about that, and our brains just haven't changed all that much. So when we're emotionally high, we're in protection mode. It's think fast, react fast. Get the hell out of there, fight back, do whatever we need to protect ourselves. And so that decreases our capacity to actually stop, think, pause. Now we can do that. We have the skills to do it. It's a skill that we have to learn. As you said earlier, this is hard work. It's hard to pause for a second and think it through. So when we're angry, we're going to be a little bit more impulsive, especially as our anger is really high. I don't know anyone in my 30 years of psychology that's ever said, yeah, I've never regretted something I said or did when I was angry. you know, we don't mean it. I mean, it doesn't make it right that we did it. It just, sometimes things just happen. So yeah, we're going to make more errors. When we lessen that, then we can be strategic. Then we're using those other good parts of our brain. We're using that frontal cortex that lets us plan through, and it lets us organize. It lets us create dialogue. All of these things that come into play. So a little bit of anger in that level is not going to result in impulsivity, but the higher it is. And again, I'm going to throw social media. It's why social media is actually so dangerous with communication, because people can really put a quick response on there without thinking that through. It's just boom, I'm going to type this. And yeah, I've seen many people who they go, oh man, you can't believe what I put on. And I took it down, but yeah, somebody took a screenshot of it. I wish that wouldn't have happened. Yeah, it's just we just don't think it through. That's all.
That example is perfect. Yesterday, I had a little bit of a disagreement, not a violent disagreement or anything
Yeah,
where we were both pissed, but a little bit of a disagreement with somebody on Twitter. And this was in the morning and I was busy. So I said, listen, here's my phone number. I don't want to sit here typing. I said, call me tonight and we'll talk through this.
sure.
It's a
Yeah,
philosophical
great.
problem. What I noticed though was by the time the night came, the issue had far less importance to me. Right?
Right.
Like at the moment, it seemed I have to clarify this. I've got to get this point across. He has to understand. And then later in the day, I'm like, why did I even care about
Right.
about this? Like, is this really worth talking about? Because
Yeah.
the anger brings with it this sense of urgency. Like I
Yeah.
have to act. It has
Right.
to get taken care of. It has to get done. I'm
Yeah.
curious about if there is what's the word? A commensurate dynamic with the passion-based motivation, and that how does that affect the brain, and is that more conducive to physical health and toward achieving our goals?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, and there's definitely there's a lot of research kind of in both areas. So, kind of the difference is it doesn't start very different. I mean, there's still that idea that we initiate this kind of dopamine reward kind of sensation. The difference, though, is we can use these kind of pleasant hormones. So oxytocin is the primary one, and we have those receptors all through our body, right? Like so, we react, to different things. Some people call it the love hormone, or the relationship hormone, or the social hormone. It feels good. It's pleasure. And I think when we get into passion, we're going to live in that pleasure space a little bit more. And again, doesn't mean that other emotions don't come into play. We want that. Like, there are times when I'm passionate on a project, my frustration's a good boost to get me to the next level sometimes. Just don't want to live in it. So yeah, there's definitely still a neurobiology that comes with passion, but it lessens that. We're not seeing that same elevation in that stress hormone. So we can work really hard on something we're passionate about, and it still feels good. There's still a pleasure with it. I mean, I have numerous times in my life that when I was on something that I was really passionate about, it made me keep wanting to do it more. It was like it's almost has the same addictive quality to it, but we're living in a much more calm space. So we don't see nearly the health difficulties when we're in that more pleasant space.
I'm reminded, and it may seem a stretch, but I'll tie it together, I promise.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, there's a principle in social psychology when somebody's working on a stressful activity and there's an audience, where if the person feels competent with what they're doing, then the stress kind of brought about by the audience is good to a certain level because the person then will perform well. Whereas if the person doesn't feel competent, the stress level rises to an unmanageable place and actually causes them to deteriorate in performance. And I'm wondering, when you commented on your frustration when you're on a project, if there's a given, up to a point, that type of anger and frustration is good because it maybe give you that little kick, but then once it gets beyond a certain point, it becomes counterproductive.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think absolutely that is. Yeah, again, we don't want to eliminate some of that anger. There's good pieces to it. It is, but it's how do we use it to our benefit to give that motivation. Again, some of the best ideas in the world come out of a frustration or an anger first, but the success comes with shifting that to a passion to get it done. And so, yeah, absolutely. If we use that anger and frustration in a productive way, it's a great thing. I tell people all the time, you can't have happiness without negative emotions. Like, don't like, so the people are just like, oh, I'm going to be happy all the time. No, you're not. And that's not even a good way to look at it. We should embrace that emotion, understand, okay, why am I frustrated? And how can I now use that and shift my mindset to the actions I want to take to move forward? Again, not tearing things down. So I could be angry on why it happened. That's not solving anything. But as soon as I get to that mind shift and say, okay, this is just my brain saying you're frustrated because it's not going as planned. Let's pause and let's think of what's the steps we're going to take to move forward? What's the way out of the anger? That's where we start seeing success with getting things done.
If I'm working on a goal, say I wanted to get you on my podcast, right? So I'm passionate about this issue. I'm passionate about value. So I want to get you on. Now, getting you on was relatively easy, but oftentimes it's not. I'll send an email, the person won't get back to me, or the person does, and I'll miss it. Whatever. There's frustrations involved.
Yeah.
In that frustration, it does serve as a motivator. So it seems like there's maybe a primary and secondary consideration where
Sure.
if I use passion as my primary motivator, that doesn't eliminate the fact that frustrations will come along.
Right.
But I don't want to have my frustration and anger be the primary driver of my behavior.
That's it. Yeah, we don't want it to be the primary, and we want to use it for the good and then shift it to something else. So, in the article you referenced, I mentioned a little bit about just emotional awareness, paying attention and calling it out, being like, hey, I'm frustrated. This person's not getting back to me. I've emailed them 10 times. I've, done all these things. That's okay. But we have a choice there, right? We can sit there and go, wow, that person's a real ass for not emailing me back, right? Like, what a jerk, whatever we want to say. And that gets us nowhere. And we can be really motivated to now hate that person. I'm never reading their articles again. I'm never, whatever. Like, we can go into a whole bunch of directions. Or we can use it and go, all right, my strategy was wrong. I need to stop. And that's not the right strategy for that person. So what are my steps? What are my options? I can drop it and find somebody else who could be a great guest. Maybe I'm going to try to call the guy on the phone. Maybe I'm going to check out their webpage. It gets us to a different place. So I think that frustration, that's just us. Okay, this is an alarm going off. We're not going the direction we want. But do we take it in a negative way and live there? I know a lot of people that do. And they'll live there and be like, then they just start talking bad about that person because they couldn't get a hold of them to be a guest on their show, versus going, all right, let's think about how I can do this different to get what I want. If I want that person on my show, I'm going to find a way to do it.
There's times a lot of times, not just a few, in my life where I'll be having a conversation with someone and I'll give advice.
Yeah.
And the advice I give is real simple, and I come off like a dick because this person is dealing with very difficult, things.
Yeah, right.
And the answer is often simple, but it's not easy to do, right? So it's simple to me. If you want to change your values to a passion based motivation, you have to change the way you think about things. Change the focus of your mind toward what you want rather than what you don't want.
That's right.
But actually doing that, right, as simple as it sounds, is a monumental task.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for somebody? What strategies and tactics can somebody implement if they want to cultivate a passion-based life or in passion-based motivation as opposed to the anger stuff?
Yeah, well, I think starting where what you just said, what are your values? What energizes you? I always say I live my life by, can I put my head on my pillow at the end of the night? Can I lay there and put my head down and say, hey, I lived the life I wanted to live today? And I think we always have to start there. That's the foundation. But then I think the actions, sometimes because there are values, we think way too big. And we want to accomplish these big things, and sometimes we just have to step back and say, you know what, that might be too much. So what's a step? What's a small thing I can do to get in that direction? And let's be successful in small segments first. I always when I work with people in therapy, I always use the analogy of folding a sheet of paper. And how many times do we have to fold a sheet of paper before that paper would be thick enough to go from the earth to the moon? And most people think it's a ton. It's 42 times. If you take a single sheet of paper and you fold it in half and you fold it 42 times, it's over 8 trillion layers thick, which will actually reach the moon. It's momentum. That first 2 folds doesn't get you very close. But man, when you fold it again, the thickness gets exponentially higher and it goes. And so when we're doing these passion things, we got to start small. What can I get done today? And that's it. And it doesn't have to be the whole project. It may not be what I want the long term. But at the end of the day, I got something done. And tomorrow, if I can just double that, there's momentum. And then we start compounding our effort and we start seeing big changes. And I think if we view life in that way, we can get a lot done. It's amazing, I think, sometimes that just focusing on the small first is going to give us that momentum. So I think that's the good starting point. I mentioned, I think, also that idea of paying attention to emotions and not eliminating the negative, but figuring out how do we tolerate it, and there are times, I ask myself, is my anger or frustration, is it productive? And sometimes it might be, and that's okay. I might use it for a little bit then, but then I'm like, okay, listen, it's not getting me what I want. It's not getting me the direction I want. Then I have to shift that mindset. So paying attention to what those negative emotions are, and then figure out how do we tolerate and kind of change those. Those are, I think, 2 really easy start points.
would goal setting, I mean, making our goals explicit rather than just having them sort of spinning in our heads, would that be helpful?
Always. I'm a goal guy. Like I like writing down everything that I'm going to do. So yeah, I think writing it down explicitly what it is, but also being willing to change our goals. Like I think that sometimes we write those goals and then we're frustrated because we're not getting them. They just might be bad goals. That doesn't mean we can't get back there, but maybe they're too big. So making it very explicit. What can I accomplish in the amount of time that I have to do it? So for me, just in kind of my personal life, I always have a few big goals that I always write down. They stay on my sheet of paper that I have consistently over some months. But every day under those, I write one thing that I'm going to do to move in the direction of that goal. So I may not get to that big overarching goal. It's what I'm aspiring to do. But what's the one step I'm going to take to get there? And that's what I want to be able to do each day to make sure I'm at least taking a step in that direction. So we can't just focus on the big. We do have to have some little marking points that we can go, okay, I can cross that off today. I did that. And again, it's momentum building.
Just like folding the paper, right?
It's folding the paper. It's it. It is. It's folding the paper. And then, well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure you've had this experience. How many times do we take one little goal and we start it on a day, and then we get a whole bunch of other stuff done that we weren't even expecting to do? It's like we thought like, oh, hey, I'm going to do this one thing. Well, even in that day, maybe a little momentum happens. Maybe we're like, oh, wow, this sparked another idea. Let me get this done. Before you know it, we've taken 10 steps off of one little goal for a day. Those are good days. Yeah. I mean, have you had days like that?
I sure have. And
Yeah.
I like your point about changing goals
Yeah.
because something that I found out was I was incarcerated for a very long time, and my friend and I wrote a book while we were incarcerated.
Yeah.
My goal at that time was to get out of prison and go into counseling of some sort.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time educating myself about different types of counseling, different theories, and that's what I wanted to do. And then in promoting the book, I ended up a guest on a talk show. And the first time I was on the talk show, when we were done, the host said to me, "How would you like to be a regular on the show?" And I, of course. And then I hung up the phone and I went back to my cell and I said, "Oh my God, what the hell am I going to talk about every week?" But from doing that show, I realized that talking, being a talk show host, is what I wanted to do. So
Right.
from having, the goal of getting the book published and promoted, I changed a different goal about
Yeah.
becoming a counselor to being a talk show host.
Right.
But I had to be willing to do it once I saw there was a passion that I had here as
Right.
opposed to counseling. I allowed myself to go with it. Whereas if I would have just stuck to the counseling, I never would have done this, and I probably would have ended up bitter. To be quite honest with you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how those things kind of happen. I mean, I tell everybody, I I never would have expected I've done what I've done in my life and career. Never. It's taken some twists and turns, and you let those things happen, and you readjust. So I mean, I'll give you just a quick aside. I don't want to have too much time, but I oftentimes get interviewed and asked about how I got into psychology, and I got into psychology. I actually thought I was going to work primarily in forensic or in prisons and that type of work. That was the goal I was initially going to. And when I was in my undergrad degree, I was interning in a state prison and got to meet a lot of guys in there and learned a lot. I learned more in that short period of time than probably any class that I've ever been in. But one day we were sitting down, and one of the guys that was in a group that I was running, it was actually an anger management group. He looks at me and he says, "Why are you here?" And I said, "What do you mean, why am I here? Like, like, because I like doing this." He's like, "Man, I remember being 8 and not knowing how to control my anger. He's like, I'm here now, and this is great. Like, and the guys were really good in a group. It was like a good dialogue. Like we had a really some great sessions. But he's like, man, I wish I met you then. He's like, I really, and I walked out of there and I couldn't get this conversation out of my head. And this guy changed my life. I mean, completely. And 2 weeks later, I signed up to be a school psychologist and went into working in schools, which I never wanted to work with kids, And that decision and that goal change by going, wait a second, this is a calling for me for some reason. This conversation had purpose. I needed to listen to to what he had to say. I was able to think about it. And then I spent the first part of my career working with kids. And that situation led me to school mental health and how can we train kids better. And most of my initial books that I've written have all been around how do we teach cognitive therapy to kids so that we can prevent the difficulties at a young age. And I say, I owe it to that conversation. I owe it to that goal change. It would have been really easy not to listen to that and to go, this is just what I'm going to do. And I probably would have had a wonderful career, probably still would have. But my career's taken a whole bunch of different paths. And now I get to work with adults and kids. And I think sometimes we just have to pause and say, wait a second. And for me, it was passion. When after that conversation, I became passionate about helping kids not be in a situation that they felt they were out of control. And I learned a lot from one individual that made me do that. So that's my little example of goal changing.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah,
Ray, thank you so much
you're welcome.
for being with us today.
Oh, thank you.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely can find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of those things. My website is just www.drraychristner.com, and there's some information about me, and usually if there's any kind of media things. And also, I do have podcast as well that is called Psych to Practice, that is primarily about just how we use psychology in life. So check me out there as well.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Michael. Thank
For
you.
now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.